May 14, 1945. A requisition schoolhouse in Lüneburg, northern Germany. The air inside the interrogation room is thick with cigarette smoke and the faint smell of damp plaster. Outside, British jeeps idle in the courtyard. Inside, silence. 3 women sit on wooden chairs facing a blank wall. They wear civilian clothes now, threadbare coats, worn shoes, but their posture remains military. Straight backs, hands folded, eyes forward. They do not speak. Behind them, a British lieutenant adjusts a 16mm projector, threading film through sprockets with practiced hands. The machine hums. A square of light flickers onto the wall. The youngest woman, 23, blonde, former signals auxiliary, shifts in her seat. Her fingers tighten around the edge of her chair. She does not know what she is about to see. None of them do. The projector clicks. The reel begins to turn. And in that moment, before the first image appears, something inside the room changes. The war is over, but the reckoning has just begun. They were not soldiers, not in the traditional sense. They did not storm beaches or fly bombers or charge through fire. But they were essential. Without them, the machinery of the Third Reich could not have functioned. They were the women of Nazi Germany's auxiliary services, the unseen workforce that kept communications flowing, paperwork moving, and facilities operating. They were typists and radio operators, administrators and guards. They were believers. By 1945, over 500,000 German women served in military-adjacent roles. The Nachrichtenfelfen operated switchboards and decoded messages for the Wehrmacht. The Stabshelfer managed logistics and personnel records. The Luftwaffe in Helfen tracked aircraft and coordinated air defense networks. And then there were the Aufseherinnen, female guards at concentration camps, who supervised prisoners, enforced discipline, and carried out orders with chilling efficiency. Most were young. Many had joined voluntarily, swept up in the fervor of the Bund Deutscher Mädel, the League of German Girls, where Nazi ideology was drilled into them from adolescence. They were taught that Germany's survival depended on loyalty, sacrifice, and absolute obedience to the Führer. They were told they were building a new world. They believed it, or at least, they convinced themselves they did. These women were not passive bystanders. They signed documents that sent people to labor camps. They relayed orders that coordinated deportations. They enforced rules that led to suffering and death. Some claimed ignorance. Some believed in the cause until the very end. But by May 1945, the cause was ash. April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler died by his own hand in a Berlin bunker as Soviet shells turned the city into rubble. 8 days later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over, but the Allied powers faced a staggering problem. What to do with millions of Germans who had participated in, supported, or enabled one of history's most murderous regimes? The answer was denazification, a systematic effort to dismantle Nazi ideology, prosecute war criminals, and re-educate a population that had been fed propaganda for 12 years. American, British, French, and Soviet forces divided Germany into occupation zones. Interrogation centers were established, questionnaires were distributed, files were opened, and arrests began. Female auxiliaries were not exempt. Thousands were detained for questioning. Some faced immediate prosecution, particularly camp guards, whose crimes were documented and undeniable. Others were categorized as followers, or nominal participants, subjected to interviews, background checks, and psychological assessments. Allied intelligence officers quickly realized that many of these women had no concept of Germany's true defeat. They had been evacuated from their posts as the front collapsed. They had fled west ahead of Soviet advances. They had heard rumors of surrender, but refused to believe them. So the Allies used a weapon more powerful than any interrogation technique: truth. Film reels captured by combat cameramen and newsreel teams were compiled into stark, undeniable evidence. Footage of bombed German cities, images of liberated concentration camps, scenes of skeletal prisoners and mass graves. These films were shown in town squares, cinemas, and interrogation rooms across occupied Germany. The goal was simple: force confrontation, strip away denial, make them see what they had been part of. And for many German women, sitting in those darkened rooms in the spring and summer of 1945, seeing was the moment everything shattered. They were not monsters. That was the unsettling part. They were daughters, sisters, some were mothers. The woman seated on the left had worked as a telephone operator in Hamburg before the war. She joined the Nachrichtenfelfen in 1942 because the pay was better than factory work. The one in the middle had been a schoolteacher. She volunteered for the Signals Corps because she wanted to serve her country. The youngest, just 23, had grown up in Hanover, attended BDM meetings every week, and genuinely believed that Germany was fighting for survival against Jewish Bolshevik conspiracies. She had never questioned it. Why would she? Their ages ranged from early 20s to late 30s. Most had completed their service in rear echelon positions, far from the front lines, far from the camps. They had typed reports, relayed radio messages, filed paperwork. They had never pulled a trigger, but their work had kept the system running. They had enabled it. And now, in this room, they were being forced to see the results. The films were compiled by Allied psychological warfare units specifically for this purpose. British and American cameramen had followed troops into Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, and Dachau in April 1945. What they found defied comprehension. Thousands of corpses stacked like firewood, survivors so emaciated their bones pressed through skin, crematoria still warm, gas chambers with scratches on the walls. The footage was graphic, unedited, deliberate. It showed British soldiers using bulldozers to push bodies into mass graves because there were too many to bury individually. It showed German civilians from nearby towns being marched through camp gates, forced to witness what had been done in their name. It showed the faces of survivors, blank, hollow, beyond trauma. The human mind has limits. It can only sustain certain beliefs when reality permits it. For 12 years, these women had been told that Germany was righteous, that the war was defensive, that the enemy was subhuman and dangerous. They had been told that the camps were work facilities, that prisoners were criminals and partisans, that everything being done was necessary for survival. They had been told this so many times, through so many channels, radio, newsreels, posters, rallies, that it became the architecture of their understanding. And now that architecture was collapsing, frame by frame, image by image, when the projector showed the ruins of Berlin, the Reichstag gutted, the Brandenburg Gate standing alone in a wasteland, some women stared in disbelief. When it showed Hamburg after the firestorm bombings, entire neighborhoods erased, one woman covered her mouth. She had family there. When the footage shifted to the camps, the room changed. The youngest woman closed her eyes. The schoolteacher began to shake her head slowly, rhythmically, as if denying what she was seeing could make it untrue. The telephone operator from Hamburg wept silently, tears running down her face without sound. Some refused to watch. They turned their heads. They insisted it was propaganda, that the Allies had staged it, that it was lies meant to break German morale. But the British lieutenant did not stop the projector. He did not argue. He simply let the film run. Because the images spoke for themselves. The Allies had learned something crucial during the war. Words could be dismissed, but images could not. Propaganda worked both ways. If the Nazis had used film to glorify the regime, the Allies would use film to dismantle it. Newsreels were portable, reproducible, and undeniable. They required no translation. A mass grave looked the same in any language. Psychologically, the strategy was sound. Confronting someone with visual evidence created cognitive dissonance, too powerful to ignore. It bypassed rational argument and struck directly at belief. The goal was not to humiliate for cruelty's sake. The goal was to shatter the foundations of Nazi ideology so completely that it could never be rebuilt. Make them see, make them feel, make them unable to pretend they did not know. The projector clicks. The first image appears. A panoramic shot of Berlin, filmed from a Soviet camera position in early May. The city is unrecognizable. The Tiergarten is a blackened scar. The Reichstag stands hollow, its dome collapsed inward. Entire streets have ceased to exist, just rubble corridors stretching toward the horizon. The narration is in English, calm and factual, but the women do not need translation. They know these streets, or they knew them. The youngest woman leans forward slightly, as if trying to find something familiar in the wreckage. Her lips part. She does not speak. On screen, the camera pans across a destroyed railway station. Bodies lie in the rubble, uncollected. Civilian bodies, German bodies. The telephone operator from Hamburg exhales sharply. Her hands grip the armrests. The film cuts to Hamburg itself. Aerial footage, likely American. The firestorm district is gone. Where 30,000 people once lived, there is only ash and twisted metal. The woman who wept earlier is no longer weeping. She stares. Her face has gone pale. She whispers something in German, too quiet for the British officer to hear. It sounds like a name. Then Dresden, then Cologne, then Munich. City after city, methodically destroyed. The narrator's voice lists tonnages, casualty estimates, dates of raids. The images do not linger. They do not need to. The message is clear. Germany has been leveled. The war is lost. There is no coming back from this. The schoolteacher in the middle seat shakes her head again. Harder now. She mutters under her breath, Lügen, Lügen, lies. But her voice cracks. Because she knows it is not lies. She has heard the bombs. She has seen the refugees. She has watched the Wehrmacht collapse. The projector does not care what she believes. It simply shows what is . And then the film changes. The screen flickers. The ruins disappear. What replaces them is worse. Bergen-Belsen. April 15, 1945. British troops entered the camp 4 days after the German surrender of the region. The first shots are wide, barbed wire, wooden barracks, watchtowers. It looks almost orderly from a distance. Then the camera moves closer. Bodies, thousands of them, lying in open pits, stacked against barracks walls, sprawled in the dirt where they fell. The living move among the dead like ghosts. Skeletal figures in striped rags, too weak to stand, staring into the camera with eyes that have seen beyond human endurance. The youngest woman gasps. She presses her hand over her mouth. The schoolteacher stops, shaking her head. She's frozen now, staring at the screen as if paralyzed. The telephone operator turns away, her shoulders hunching inward. 9, she whispers. 9, 9, 9. Double quotes. The British lieutenant stands silent behind them. He has seen this footage before. He has watched it break stronger people than these 3 women. He knows what comes next. Buchenwald, Dachau, Nordhausen. The camps roll past, one after another. The camera does not flinch. It shows everything. Crematoria with charred bones still inside. Tables where medical experiments were conducted. Gallows, execution walls. And survivors, so thin their ribs press through skin like cage bars. Their faces hollow, their limbs skeletal. Some are too weak to move. Others stare at the liberating soldiers with expressions beyond relief or gratitude. Just numbness. A British officer on screen orders German civilians from a nearby town to walk through the camp. Men in suits, women in Sunday dresses. They cover their noses against the smell. Some vomit, some weep, some look away. The camera captures all of it. One German woman faints. Another argues with a British soldier, insisting she did not know. She could not have known. He points at the camp. The smokestacks are visible from her village. She has no answer. In the Lüneburg interrogation room, the youngest woman is sobbing now. Not quietly, fully. Her shoulders shake. She doubles over in her chair, hands covering her face. The schoolteacher sits rigid, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she does not look away. She forces herself to watch. The telephone operator has turned her chair to the side. She cannot bear it. "Wir wussten nicht," she says. "We did not know." But her voice is hollow. Even she does not believe it anymore. The projector hums. The reel continues. And in that room, in that moment, something irreversible happens. The ideology that held them together, The belief that they serve something noble, something necessary, shatters. They are not watching enemy propaganda. They are watching the truth. And the truth is unbearable. The projector clicks off. The room floods with silence. The British lieutenant switches on an overhead lamp. The three women sit in the harsh light, their faces streaked with tears, their composure shattered. None of them speak. One stares at the floor, another at her hands. The youngest is still trembling. The interrogation continues. Not immediately. The lieutenant waits. He has learned that the minutes after the screening are the most valuable. Denial becomes harder to maintain. The psychological defenses collapse. Some women confess to things they had hidden. Others beg for understanding, insisting they were only following orders, that they had no choice, that they did not know the full extent of what was happening. Some remain silent, retreating inward, unable or unwilling to process what they have witnessed. The schoolteacher speaks first. Her voice is barely audible. She admits she worked at a Wehrmacht communications hub in East Prussia. She relayed messages about prisoner transports. She did not ask questions. She did not want to know. The telephone operator admits she heard rumors about camps. Everyone had heard rumors, but rumors were dangerous to repeat. Safer to ignore them. Safer to look away. The youngest woman says nothing. She signs her statement with shaking hands and is led from the room. Their fates varied. Women identified as camp guards, Aufseherinnen who had directly participated in atrocities, faced war crimes trials. Some were executed. Others received prison sentences, but the majority of female auxiliaries, like the three in the Lüneburg schoolhouse, were processed through denazification tribunals. They filled out questionnaire. They were categorized: major offender, offender, lesser offender, follower, exonerated. Most fell into the latter categories. They were released, often with restrictions on employment or residence. They returned to a Germany that no longer existed. The newsreels themselves became evidence. The footage shown in interrogation rooms was archived, catalogued, and presented at the Nuremberg trials. Allied prosecutors used the films to establish the scale and systematic nature of Nazi crimes. The images of Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, and Dachau were projected in the Palace of Justice courtroom. Nazi officials watched in silence. Some claimed they did not know. The films proved otherwise. The camps had been part of a coordinated system. Someone had built them. Someone had staffed them. Someone had given the orders. For the women who had watched those screenings in the spring of 1945, life after the war was complicated. Some disappeared into the chaos of post-war Germany, changing their names, moving to distant cities, rebuilding identities far from their pasts. Others returned to their hometowns and lived quietly, never speaking of their service. A few fled entirely, to South America, to Austria, to rural villages where no one asked questions. The psychological impact lingered. Allied psychiatrists who interviewed former auxiliaries noted patterns: depression, nightmares, extreme guilt, or conversely, continued denial. Some women spent decades insisting the footage had been manipulated, that the camps were exaggerated for propaganda purposes. Others carried the weight differently. They could not unsee what they had seen. The images haunted them. Some sought absolution through silence, others through confession, though there were few places in post-war Germany willing to listen. By the 1950s, as West Germany rebuilt and the Cold War solidified, the urgency of denazification faded. Many former Nazis reintegrated into society. The women who had served the regime became secretaries, teachers, mothers, grandmothers. The past was buried, not forgotten, never truly forgotten, but buried beneath the need to move forward. The newsreels, however, remained, archived in London, Washington, Moscow, silent witnesses to a moment when belief collided with truth, and truth won. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from discovering you are wrong about everything. Not wrong about a detail or a decision, but wrong about the foundation of your understanding, wrong about the cause you believed in, wrong about the leaders you trusted, wrong about the world itself. That pain is not just intellectual, it is existential. It strips away identity, purpose, meaning, and it leaves nothing but silence. The women who sat in those darkened rooms in 1945 were not shown those films to satisfy allied cruelty. They were shown them because ideology cannot survive contact with reality. Propaganda works only as long as the truth remains hidden. The moment the camps were liberated, the moment the cameras rolled, the moment the projectors clicked on in requisitioned schoolhouses across occupied Germany, the lie ended. History does not remember most of their names, but it remembers what they represented, the ordinary people who enabled extraordinary evil, not through malice, but through belief, obedience, and willful ignorance. The newsreels forced a confrontation they could no longer avoid, and in that confrontation, something necessary and terrible happened. They saw, and they could never unsee. The humiliation was not in being shown the films. The humiliation was in realizing they had always known, somewhere beneath the surface, that something was terribly wrong, and they had chosen not to look.